Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar, Building Power Apps and Automations with Microsoft Dynamics 365. My name is Lisa Treasure, I'm Head of Marketing here at Chorus. And I just wanted to kind of kick us off before I hand over to our expert, Nick Murdoch. So just before I go through the agenda, just a bit of housekeeping. This webinar is going to be recorded. A copy of the slides and recording will be shared with everyone following the event. We've also got Q&A throughout, so if you've got any questions, please pop them in our Q&A chat box. That's in the top right-hand corner. The plan for today is about 30 minutes to 40 minutes of talking, but with some time for Q&A right at the end, so please do ask your questions and we'll get to them. So for the agenda, we are going to be doing a bit of an overview of Power Apps, Power Automate and the Dataverse. We're going to be looking at how they work with Microsoft Dynamics 365. And then we will hop into a bit of a demo. So this webinar is going to be run by Nick Murdoch, who is our Senior Technical Architect here at Chorus. And then, as mentioned, we've got some time for Q&A at the end. So just quickly before we kick off the session, a little bit about us. So we are Chorus, we're a managed IT and cybersecurity provider. We're based in the UK and we specialise in Microsoft technologies, covering Azure, Microsoft 365 and Dynamics 365. So without further ado, I'd like to kick us off and pass over to Nick.
Thanks, Lisa. Right, let me share. Actually, Lisa, do you want to skip to the next slide for me? Perfect. So hi everyone. We're going to keep this fairly light for a post-lunchtime webinar, so hopefully no one's going to be dropping off. But what we're going to do, as Lisa said, is we're going to have a little look at the Power Platform, Power Apps and Dataverse, and how we can interact with those through low-code application development. So there's three elements that we're going to look at today. We're going to look at as I said, Power Apps, Power Automate, and Dataverse. And Power Apps is really a term, if you're not familiar with it, for first-party apps that sit on top of the Dataverse. You can kind of think of the Dataverse as a bit of a SQL database that's powering all of this wonderful Power Platform with lots and lots of functionality around it. And Power Automate is actually one of those features of the Power Platform that allows us to put business process automations in place. So implement different logic and even connect different technologies together. Do you want to skip to the next slide for me? Thanks, Lisa. Okay, so why use the Power Platform? Well, we've got a few little bullet points here, but it's not all positive. There are obviously considerations that you need to have. So let's look at the pros. So it's easy to integrate with the Microsoft stack, as you would expect. It's all written by Microsoft for Microsoft, and so has a whole plethora of different ways of interacting with that stack, be it applications like the Dataverse or SharePoint, or more administrative parts of the stack like Azure and all of the other pieces that make up our world these days. As I said, there's a wealth of connectors, not just Microsoft, there's third parties as well. So it's not just talking with Excel and SharePoint and that kind of thing. There's also, I mean, there's even Salesforce in there, there's MailChimp, there's hundreds of thousands of them, and it's growing all the time. Not to mention you can write your own as well. It's pretty easy. Might be a webinar that we'll do in the future to grab an API and create a custom connector to it. Really, really useful. It's a clear builder. If you're not a coder, you can drag and drop, and we'll see that today. All of this means that we can reduce our development time for simple concepts. The reason that simple concepts are ideal for it is because they're simple by their nature. We don't have to deviate very far from what's available to us. That allows us to remove kind of mundane tasks. So what we're looking at today, historically, we'd have coded everything up manually, and that would have taken a couple of days of bug testing and QA and that kind of thing. But we've got this kind of purpose-built ready to go platform to do all of that kind of tedious work for us. So all of this gives more power to our power users. That's not always 100% a good thing. You also need to govern them. So we'll talk about that in a moment. There's a huge community out there with the Power Platform. It doesn't take much Googling to find someone to help you out or someone that's done it before. So that really, for those that want to roll up their sleeves and get going with it, that's a really brilliant feature. So all of that gives us a broad range of functionality without the need for full Dynamics 365. So Dynamics 365 is actually a term used for, historically, it was a CRM system, and over the years it has grown and grown and grown. And now Dynamics 365 actually incorporates lots of different first-party apps. So things like customer experience and sales and project service and field service, all of them are considered Dynamics 365. So do be careful when you're Googling. You can quite often end up on the wrong piece of documentation, so check that heading. Okay, so limitations, considerations. Watch out for those premium connectors. In the world, you do get what you pay for, and usually when you want to do something fancy, you'll be in the realm of premium connector. It is very clear, and you'll see it in this demo. There's a big old diamond icon that indicates, and that just means you need to look at your licensing and contact your partner, and they can help you figure out which licensing you need to be on. Debugging can be tricky. So typically when you code, in the kind of old true sense of the word, you'd be able to step through your code and see exactly how things are changing. Microsoft are putting more and more effort into that area to make it a better experience, but as of now it is quite tricky to see what's going on, what's going wrong, stepping over things, and doing anything fancy other than just running it, see if it works, track through what it did, why didn't it work, do again, rinse and repeat. It is very easy to end up with a very unwieldy automation. So we're going to do a very simple one today, intentionally so, but we'll have a little talk at the end on where you would go with it, and things can become a bit out of hand quite quickly. And then the last one is this phrase of low code, no code. There's no hiding it. There is actually code involved. It's just not C# or JavaScript. It's not really much different from Excel, putting formulae in bars, but it does mean that you do have to have some idea of how to code and logic. It's not quite as easy as the marketing would have you believe. Cool, let's move on to the next one. So just a quick look at the landscape and how these things fit together. So at the bottom, we'll start from the bottom, we'll work our way up. Underpinning everything, we've got Microsoft Azure, lots of different services, the Microsoft Graph and Azure Active Directory for authentication. That means that everything is underpinned by your security measures, your conditional access, which is a massive plus. So multi-factor authentication and location, all that kind of stuff. That's underpinning everything. On top of that, we've got the Dataverse, which actually behind the scenes is a SQL database, but it comes with, it's a bit different from just spinning up a database. The added benefit is all of the APIs and things that you get automatically. So when you add a new table or you add new columns, you automatically have the endpoints added to interact with those new tables. And that's where our connectors come in. So from SharePoint to Teams to Office and all the third parties, they make use of those APIs that are surfaced by the Dataverse, as do our Power Platform kind of first party apps. So Power Automate and Power BI and Power Apps, they're all making use of that Dataverse. You don't have to have just one Dataverse in your organization. You may have many and you may move data between them, but kind of the dream for most people is to have one. It just gets a little bit tricky with security, but with good planning, it's achievable. So what is the difference between the Dataverse and Dynamics 365? I've touched on it a little bit. So Dynamics 365, is now these days it's a suite of apps from sales to customer service, finance, field service, etc. Essentially, they are Power Apps. They're built. Microsoft build them with the same tools that they give over to us as developers and the community to build model-driven apps. It's just Microsoft obviously put a lot of time and a lot of R&D and testing into those. So that's where you pay the premiums for those Dynamics 365 apps. They all sit on the Dataverse, and then that Dataverse sits on Azure, as we've just discussed, allowing our connectors to connect in and out. There is a big decision that has to be had when you embark on a project, and that is whether to go with the Dataverse or Dynamics 365. The reason for this is certainly historically, and I think it's getting better that you can kind of backtrack, but it's not quite the same if you start with a Dataverse and then start installing products. There's additional tables and extra functionality that come in, even if you just select, this is going to be Dynamics 365, but I don't want any first-party apps installed. I just want to state that it's a 365 environment. So I will end up with things like accounts tables and that kind of thing. I think they're known as the complex tables. So do consider it. If there's any chance that you may branch into installing something like click dimensions for email marketing in the future, go with Dynamics 365. It doesn't have to change your licensing and your license requirements, but it does need to be considered. So some use cases. So Canvas apps you may have heard about. I've just mentioned model-driven apps, but Canvas apps are a way of having a lot more flexibility on the look and feel of an application that interacts with the Dataverse and other elements through Power Automate. It's primarily targeted at mobile devices, so tablets and mobile phones, and usually you would create a Canvas app to do a very specific function. You don't generally create a Canvas app to do 3 or 4 functions. You go for targeted, you keep it simple. The idea is to get in and get out if you're a user, but they do come with a little bit more testing needs because obviously you're not within you're within a framework, but the framework's a lot more loose than with a model-driven app. But they're brilliant for on the road, for your sales staff, account managers, for people that aren't in the office that need to do one very specific task or a couple. And then you've got your automations that sit in that Power Automate layer that allow you to move data to and from D365 and connect other apps. So there's a huge amount of functionality available, and it's sometimes quite hard to work out which path you should go down, and that's where a partner really comes in. We are there and they're there to help tease out those requirements, find out where the requirements are going in the future, not just 6-18 months, but 4, 5 years, 10 years. What's the plan for this system? Because you don't want to have to unpick a lot of work once you've embarked on it. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of a demo, or I'm going to do a bit of a demo. And what we're going to do is we're going to stitch together the example is a website contact form. I'm actually going to use bubble.io for this, this is an easy way to kind of drag and drop. And we're going to show how easy it is to create a Power Automation that will receive information in, work with that information, and then push it into the Dataverse. And then we're going to kind of build on that and maybe put in sending a thank you email and or an internal notification. And we'll just see what those parts are. As I said, I'm going to keep it fairly light for the afternoon, so shouldn't have any code. I think the most is I've got to show you a bit of JSON, which I'll talk about in a moment. So let me share my screen. And there we go. Okay, so I've got already set up for me a development environment, and we're going to add into my solution. If you're working with Dynamics or if you're working with Power Apps, please have a look at kind of application lifecycle management, ALM, and make sure you look at solutions. Governance is really, really important with all of these things, and making sure people do things in the right way is key to not getting yourself in a real mess in the future. So we've got a little solution here. I've got a few connections in there already, but we're just going to add into our solution an automation. So we're going to do a Cloudflow automated. We're actually going to skip the naming because I want to start from fresh. So first task, I will give it a name. So we're going to call this web. And what I want to use is I want to use the request trigger. So with a Power Automation, you always start off with a trigger. When something happens, what is the thing that I want to happen to trigger and kick this off? And the request trigger basically says when something posts to my URL, which will be generated after I save, I'm going to do something with that information, but I need to tell it what the information is going to be. Otherwise, it's pretty much up for grabs, and I'm not going to have much luck. So I can use a sample payload, and it's JSON, as I said. So what I've got here is a JSON object, and if you're not familiar with it, it's very simple. I've got the name of my attribute, column, field. So in the front end, it would look like a field on the form. So I'm going to have a first name field, and I've got my name. I'm going to have a last name field, an email field, company name field, a phone number field, and I'm going to have a question field. And they're all going to be text, so I've got quotes around everything. If you do something weird, like not have your quotes in there, it will tell you you're doing something wrong. It must be double quoted. So there's not much you can do to kind of go off in the wrong direction here. So I'm going to hit done, and it will generate my schema for me. And then I'm just going to start really basic. I'm not actually going to do anything in this HTTP request. So I'm just going to say I want to receive it, and then every request deserves a response. It's just polite. And we're going to put in a response and keep it as basic as that. So in theory, I should now from somewhere be able to post some information in the format that I've specified, so that JSON object format, to this URL, which has now been generated. And the system should respond with a 200, which is a success in the world of web dev. So I'm going to go over to Bubble. And here is my form that I have kind of just thrown together. You can see we've got an about you, first name, last name, all of those fields that we were talking about, and ask a question. And in Bubble, there's the concept of plugins, but this would be the same thing if I were posting from any website. So it could be WordPress, it could be Umbraco, anything that you can issue a post from. So that's like a send my information. That's all you need. So we'll call that Dataverse, and we'll call our API call submit. Oh, lost focus. Submit. That's unlucky. Submit. Contact. We're not expecting anything back from this because we're just sending back a 200. We're posting, and I'm going to paste my URL. So I'm using this as an action. This is a concept that is unique to Bubble. I can do other things like gets and to get information from somewhere else, which again is another use of Power Automate. I do need to add in a header. This is about as codey as we're going to get, I promise. So content type, application, JSON. And that just tells the API, hey, I'm sending you some JSON. Please don't be alarmed. And then I'm going to put my example of my body in there. Again, just the same as I did in Power Automate. And I'm going to say initialize. So what this will do is it will go off and it will talk to the API, and it will just check everything's all right. Am I expecting, have I got back everything that I was expecting? So we can actually check that by, if I go back to my flow, I'll open it in a new tab so it doesn't keep jumping me around. And there we go. We can see our success from my initialization, and I can have a little look at that. and I can see it was received. I can see the data that came through. It's all nicely separated into its attributes. And I can see we then issued a 200. So everything is looking like I'm going in the right direction. So brilliant. I've set up Bubble and I've set up Power Automate. The two should now talk to each other. So I've just got to stitch and say, okay, well, when do I want this to happen? So I want this to happen when I click on submit. And I'm going to say add an action, plugins, submit contact. And over here, you can see here's my JSON. It's becoming very familiar now. So let's take out Nick, because I don't want everyone to be called Nick. And we're going to use the first name's value. Don't want everyone to be called Murdoch. Use the last name's value. And we're going to use, you've guessed it, the email address's value. And we're going to use names. Main phone. Then last but not least, we're going to use the question. Okay, so at the moment, when I click submit, I'm going to push some data into, hopefully, going to push some data into my Power Automate. And then I'm going to, just for the sake of this, and we can tell things have happened, let's open the very good Chorus website. Okay, so when submit button is clicked, submit to the Dataverse, open the external website, and we could do other things, obviously. Okay, so let's give that a go. It's always worth, if you can, if it's easy to, check your code, check your functionality as you go, because it really helps if we have a saying of failing early. The earlier you fail, the less stuff you have to unpick and wade through to work out what's going on. So let's say Kelly Smith, email address, company name. Is this working? Hit submit. We've got a little loading bar at the top. We've been redirected, so all signs are looking good. Let's go back to our Power Automate. Brilliant. We've got 2 run histories. Let's look at our most recent. There we go. So we've got the data has changed. That indicates not everyone is called Nick Murdoch. Thank God. And we've got the data coming through and we're returning success. Brilliant. So now we need to decide what we're going to do with this. We've now got this in our world, and what are we going to do? Well, we've got a company name, we've got some contact information, and we've got a question. So I think for this, what we'll do is we'll create a new account inside the Dataverse. So I'm going to add in a new step. I'm going to use the Dataverse connector, and just to illustrate my point about connectors, these are all the different connectors that we've got available to us, plus any that I want to create myself. So there's so much stuff that you can do with this. So for this, we're going to work with the Dataverse and we're going to add a new row. So add a new record to the account table. That's where we put our contact information. And because I gave my input a description and it knows what to expect, it means that when I go to account name and I type in company, hey presto, from my when the HTTP request is received, I've got company name. So I can just select that. Good habit to be in, always rename your steps, because it really does pay off when your flows start getting very, very long. So we call this create company. Next, we're going to create our contact. So I'll use Dataverse again. Excuse me. Last He is, last name. Okay, so that's our main points of information. Now I want my, oh, let's not forget to rename. Come on, good habits. I want my contact to be linked to my company, and that happens here in the company name brackets accounts field. So company name is actually a customer field in the Dataverse. It means it's polymorphic. It can be either accounts or it can be contacts. So we're going to go down the accounts route because we know that's what we're doing. And we're actually going to use from our create company step, there is a property called the OData ID. Super useful. That basically gives us our linking ID when we want to link two records together. And then my last step, what I'm going to do is, again, in the Dataverse, add a new row. I'm going to put a note against the contact. This could be anything, but I need somewhere to store my question. So let's say web form contact submission. And we need the question to go in there. Don't forget to join it up because we don't want a little orphaned note running around. And we're going to put it against our, so you can see all of the regardings. This is even more kind of polymorphic. There's so many different places you can put notes, but we want it to be linked to a contact. This is where naming your steps comes in useful. You can see I've got two OData IDs. If they were just both called create new, add new row, I wouldn't really know which one to go for, but I know it's the contact, so I can click there. Okay, let's say rename. So I'm going to save that now. Wait for it to finish. Okay, let's go back on our run history. Let's give this a whirl, shall we? So to our preview, and we'll first. Oh, names are hard. You can be happy. Okay, email address, company, okay, submit. Our little bar chug in, got a success. Let's have a look at our flow. Cross your fingers. There we go. So let's look at the history. Oh, green ticks is always nice to see. So we've got our submission. We've got all of our information. We've got a company that's been created. We should have our contact that's been created. You can see there's that weird long old thing that we got from that OData ID property. And then we've got a note that should have been added. And then our responses, we know we got a 200 come back. So let's flip to the Dataverse and have a look. Here's my Dataverse. Click on my refresh. There's Lois. And we can see we've got our functionalities all kicked in. So all our relational database that the Dataverse gives us, we've got a company that's been created. We've got our contact that's been created. We've then also got our note that has been created on there. So it's a really basic example of information coming in and working with that and pushing it into Dynamics. Now, there are things that we could do. We could extend this even further. So very quickly, we could say, okay, well, I want the note to be there because that's just good for auditing. But actually, also, I want to send an email. So we're going to send an email to back to Lois. And we're going to say, thank you for your member of the team will. And these are quite nice. You can put HTML in there and put nice rich emails in there. Or you could even offload to anything really. So you could go to Teams and you could post on a Teams channel internally for the sales team for someone to pick up. You could go to something like I think MailChimp have got a connector in there, so you could post a new email through that. You can go out to Salesforce, anything that you want, you can do it. You can push into other spreadsheets, push it into SharePoint. The possibilities are honestly endless. So I hope that's given you a good idea of kind of how to stitch a web front end form into Power Automate. We're going to jump back into the presentation and we're going to finish off and just talk a little bit about what we did and where we could go from here. So what's next? Well, I spoke a little bit about posting to Teams and other possibilities, but also there's doing these things in a webinar in a very short amount of time. You keep things very simple. There's not much logic. Well, there's no logic in there. It's just a straight run through with the information. But in reality, you wouldn't want to implement a flow like this because, one, what happens if someone registers with same company name, for example? The whole point of a CRM system or a database is that every person and every company is in there once. So you really wouldn't want duplicates flying around. So around our add company, we'd want to go and look for the company first in the Dataverse. Have we got any records that have come back? If we have, then use that one. Otherwise, use this new company name. Same thing with the contact. Is anyone in there? If so, add the note to that contact. If they're not in there, then create a new contact and add the note. As well as that, we probably want to put some security around that endpoint. Last thing we want is someone getting hold of the endpoint and just hammering it with a load of information. So you might want to implement a key that's hidden that can be checked as it comes through, or use something like API management within Azure to manage. You can lock down to IP as well as keys and things like that. So there's lots of things to consider when moving from something like this, which I would term as a proof of concept, where I'm conceptually saying, yeah, that could work. I can move data from here to here to here, into production, where you want to make sure things are robust, things are tight. What happens when it goes wrong? Who gets emailed? Who gets told someone submitted a message but the flow wasn't on? All of those things are there to be considered. Cool. So that pretty much wraps up what I wanted to go through. And I guess at this point, we'll open the floor for some Q&A.
Thanks, Nick. That was great. Yeah, I've got a few questions coming in, but if you also do want to pop some questions in the Q&A chat box, please do. I'm going to start with quite a nice, simple one, I hope, for you. What's the difference between Canvas apps and model-driven apps? Okay,
so a Canvas app basically gives you a blank canvas. So you kind of have, it's a bit like paint by numbers. So you've got this blank canvas and you've got a toolbox of components, a little bit like you saw when I was doing the bubble piece. You can drag a text field on or a gallery or whatever, and you can start stitching it together. You can put code in there, albeit kind of the Power Apps version of code, to say, when I change this, then change this one, and it gives you lots and lots of flexibility about how things look and how they feel. Model-driven apps are much more kind of back office focused, so they are very rigid. a form will always have columns and tabs and fields within sections, and that is how it will always look. There's no fancy changing colors and whatnot unless you start embedding Canvas apps, and that's where things get really fun. So you can then embed a Canvas app within a model driven app and kind of have the best of both worlds.
Just looking at a few more coming in. So obviously you showed a form capture. I've got a question saying, could this replace something like click dimensions for form captures?
Yes, it could. So the way that the click dimensions form capture works for their out of the box is very, very similar, except for you build the form within click dimensions. And then it does that checking that I was talking about for production. It does that based on email address only. So it actually would allow you to go slightly further than click dimensions does and say, okay, well, if the email address matches, I'm just going to also double check that postcode matches or the phone number matches, because email address is a great one, and in theory everyone's got one email address and no one ever shares, but 9 times out of 10 customers have people that share an email address. They sign up on behalf of a partner, or especially in the not-for-profit space, that happens quite a lot.
I've got another one here. When talking about Power Platform, I keep hearing the phrase citizen developer. What exactly is a citizen developer?
Okay, so that's a good one. So a citizen developer is kind of the term that Microsoft came up with to talk about these people that previously wouldn't ever dream of developing an application because they didn't know how to code. But now with Power Automate and Canvas apps, there's a lot more power given to them, and so they can actually create, create fully fledged applications and integrations without ever having to write a line of code, and they are referred to as citizen developers. So they're kind of out there, they're in the world, they're helping everyone as well. They're the ones that are generally more active on the community because they kind of do it for the love of it.
Lovely. I've just got one last one that's come in, so do send in more if you've got any more, which is around how do you manage empowering users where business critical apps are concerned?
Yes, so this kind of relates to the governance piece that I mentioned earlier. So as developers and as partners, we put a lot of work into making sure that we adhere to strict release cycles. We make sure we do our development in a development environment, and then we release to a test and our QAs can sign it off, and then we release to a UAT environment and the users can sign it off before we ever get anywhere near production. With all of this power, you have to, as an organization, you have to make sure that you manage that element and don't just go kind of running off and saying, hey users, you can now create Power Automations within production, and kind of all sorts of chaos ensuing. There is also what's known as the Center of Excellence, which is a whole suite of templates and documents that Microsoft provide to help organizations keep on top of it. Excuse me, to help manage where these things are happening, who's doing them, how active are they, and keeping on top of things. So well worth checking out if you're thinking about empowering your users in this way.
Brilliant, thanks Nick. I think we've got through all questions. If anyone does have any questions that weren't asked or answered during the session, please feel free to send them through to us. We'll be sending you a copy of the recording and slides either later today or tomorrow. So please just reply to that with any questions. Otherwise, I think we can wrap up there. Thanks very much, Nick.
It's all right. Thanks all.
Cheers.
Bye.